It's so great to see you. My name is Katherine Kramer, and I'm the assistant headmaster at Emmanuel Lutheran School in Alexandria. We've heard from my boss and friend, Julia Habrecht, earlier today, so I'm just delighted that I get to spend this time with you and learn from you throughout the conference. And I hope that we'll have some great conversation today about caring for students with divergent abilities. How many of us here are teachers as opposed to administrators? Both.
I mean, aren't we all teachers?
Yes, I think we are.
Or that's really just it's an adjective.
Yeah, that's a great point. How many of us at our schools have developed maybe tutoring centers or tutoring programs?
2 years ago.
Yeah. And when you say kind of, do you mean it's
Well, we're getting started. Sure. We're on the cusp of something very big in regards to this.
Okay. Oh, great. Well, I'd love to hear more about it.
Today, we're going to largely discuss a few factors surrounding student performance in our classrooms and in our schools, and then I've prepared some case studies for us to look at and talk about some specific situations where we probably all see issues of student divergence in terms of knowledge or skill in the classroom. So maybe to start with, I can just paint a picture for you. If you consider a fourth grade classroom, let's say there are 17 students in the classroom, 2 of the students in that grade are at the low end in terms of their reading fluency and comprehension. They graduated from 3rd grade with normal testing results, but in the classroom in 4th grade, it's clear that they are not with the pack when it comes to their ability to engage in any work that requires reading. On the other hand, you have a student that really excels in the classroom and can do everything in half the time, it seems like, and does it well and delights in it. So mom and dad of that student at the high end ask the 4th grade teacher for special work for that child. They want more work, advanced work. They would like, a personalized course of study for that child. Conversely, with those children at the low end, it's very hard to get a hold of mom and dad and talk about what needs to happen for a student's reading skill to progress. And then you maybe have a smattering of students that are sort of in the middle of the pack in their classroom, and mom and dad of one of those students also asks for advanced work for their child. So you have one teacher and you have potentially 4 different courses of study for that teacher to provide for the children in the classroom. It's a lot for any faculty member to think through. This could illuminate maybe 5 questions that we all have to consider when we're looking at these factors in our classrooms and for our teachers. One is, how much time should a teacher at our schools focus on supporting those outliers? How much time should you focus on remedial training in the classroom? How much time should you focus on reaching sort of an advanced student or challenging them? Number 2, should a teacher supply extra credit work or advanced work at all? Is that even philosophically appropriate at our schools? The low-end students, right, that are in 4th grade and they've got C's and D's in classes. What are the long-term effects of that possibly? What's going to happen down the road potentially for that child in the curriculum that you have established? Similarly, what are some domino effects of those outliers' performances on things like your graduation standards or your curriculum? So for example, if you find that every year the transition from 5th to 6th grade is very difficult for your students and their math grades tend to drop drastically, how does that impact your curriculum standards or expectations, or should it? And then finally, how are we equipping teachers at our schools to care for these students? What are the resources that they need? Do they have time to work on these matters? Do they really not have time to work on those things? So those are the questions that illuminates for me. Any thoughts on your end that brings up?
What about when one of these lower performing students is coming into the school? Do you even take them?
It's a great question. So all the admissions decisions that come up, right? Absolutely. I think that's one of the many layers that impacts how a school, especially a small one, can care for students. What sort of admissions decisions are you making? Who are you accepting and when? What if you have mixed grade classrooms? What if you have combined kindergarten and first grade? Things like that. What are your curriculum expectations? Are you a school that emphasizes rigor pretty heavily? Is your curriculum advanced? Do you start Saxon and advance the pace of it so students will progress further? Faculty workload could be one. What are some other factors that impact how you might care for students that are outside the norm in terms of their performance?
Diagnoses.
Right, actual diagnoses.
Class size.
The
Parent.
age of a teacher, not age, but the experience. Parent involvement, how involved the parents are. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Our policies surrounding probation or graduation from one grade to the next. I think a big factor here is that our philosophy is that classical Lutheran education is and should be an education for every free man. This is what we should all be doing. This is what we want our children exposed to. When we're talking about divergent abilities, today I'd like to define that as students whose abilities lie outside the norm of their classroom peers, but are still in the classroom. So this would not be reflective of a situation in which you said at the outset, I don't think we can serve your family well. Your son has a serious diagnosis of autism and we're not going to be able to care for them or serve them. That's not what I'm hoping to focus on today. Learning differences, of course, can emerge throughout your years in a school, but rather my focus is on caring for students in your schools now and just looking at the natural spread of abilities that happen in any classroom. Any teacher will be trying to reach every student in the classroom, calling them by names, probe for understanding, have them read, have them fully engage in the work of learning. And when we're doing this, we can see that students' abilities are diverse, and their mastery when it comes to various skills is often quite diverse, even in a single classroom where they're all passing the courses. There's quite a broad spread of just abilities and knowledge. All right, I think the major question for us all to consider is one of putting first things first, really. So how do we, teachers, administrators, balance the integrity of the curriculum and our limited human resources against gaps in student skill and understanding? Maybe one way to think of it is that our academic commitment as schools is to helping each student meet the course objectives. Really no more and no less. That is our commitment. It's not to helping students advance beyond the curriculum in their current classes, nor is it allowing students to pass through grades and subjects or complete various studies in which they're not actually meeting the learning objectives. Unfortunately, a school environment cannot do what a homeschooling environment can do, which is cater to each child, meet them where they are, and progress with them on an individualistic way. We are a community, a whole class, and we have to systematize what we're doing for students. The role of parents, I think, is huge. Like Mrs. Crumweedy was saying, parents are the first and best educators, and the level of support they bring to their child's education is critical. They're really responsible for the educational choices that they make for their child and the overall education of their sons and daughters. That responsibility frees us as a school to limit our scope. I think too, it takes a lot of humility and integrity to intentionally limit ourselves to focus on what we can do well and really say we're going to focus on teaching our subjects and students. We're going to work to make sure that every student can appropriately master the learning objectives as opposed to trying to go farther than that. Okay, 4 things to consider as you're thinking about this in your own schools. We're going to look at a few documents and excerpts of documents from Emmanuel. Part of what I think we have to do is develop strong admissions protocols that are tied to faculty input. So we have a healthy balance in our schools of student growth and accountability when we accept students we can serve. And if we know from the outset that we really can't serve a student, we're most loving a family when we don't accept that child, no matter how aligned they are philosophically. The second thing would be curriculum expectations and the mastery levels we require grade by grade. So what amount of a teacher's day is full of teaching? Do they have planning time? Do they realistically have time in their day to differentiate instruction? And similarly, as you look at your curriculum and look at student growth, do you find that students continually struggle in one area or another, or a transition from one grade to the next? Another big thing to look at would be the faculty resources, the tutoring resources, and the sort of outside support that you can bring in to support students. An in-house tutoring program is huge in terms of filling gaps for students in your current curriculum. And tutoring support that is directly linked to our curriculums, I think, is key. Just telling families to go get tutoring is not necessarily going to match the needs of each child in your curriculum. And then finally, our policies and documentation are key too. How are we consistently across grades and across faculty documenting and upholding what we commit to in our curriculum? All right. The first section says admissions policies. This is just a short excerpt from Emmanuel's parent manual. It gives sort of an overview of the admissions process for families. Of course, this is the first step to get right when we're looking at caring for students. And of course, you don't always know at the end of an admissions process what might come up for a student as they develop. You can accept a student in kindergarten that gives every indication of readiness, but then for whatever reason, they're highly delayed in their ability to read or to write, and it's an indication that something else is happening. So an admissions process certainly can't prevent students in the school that will really struggle or that may be difficult to serve or care for, at grade level, but it's helpful. One of the things our admissions director, Whitney Work, does that I really admire is that she routinely, openly talks about what we're trying to do as a school, and using this sort of language. I understand that Emmanuel is a place that is just not staffed to serve children with significant learning differences or disabilities or behavioral disorders. Talking about that really clearly and openly, even in the admissions process, I think helps parents have clear expectations about what we can do and sets the context. If we're struggling to serve a child, or unfortunately we're not able to serve a child in a particular case, we have language to turn to say, this is not about our love for your child or for you, but rather we're not able to really serve them in the way that they need. Any thoughts about admissions tours, or do you do anything with admissions language at your school? Or
we do very similar. We, until including this past year, our probation was 6 weeks. We've cut it to 4 weeks. We're on a semester system. And we've dropped the word probation because some people didn't like terminology. But we just said, it's a trial fit. If after 4 weeks, your child isn't gonna fit here, you're gonna know it soon enough and go elsewhere.
I see, okay. So like a probationary acceptance. Yeah.
But we don't use the word probation anymore.
Right, a provisional acceptance of
Yeah.
some sort, yeah. Wonderful.
I think for us, when they come to us in 6th, 7th, 8th grade,
It's hard.
especially when they're coming from public school, the lack of knowledge to jump into Latin or those things, you have to really make those parents understand that it's gonna take some commitment on their part with Latin, or even with Saxon math. You know, there's all these things that we know our kids have learned in 4th grade, and sometimes they don't have that knowledge when they get to us. You know, that I think becomes a struggle with admitting, like I think we have to be very careful to not overextend what we can do. How far can we bring them in a short amount of time so that they're not feeling like they're behind the next 3 years.
Perpetually, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perpetually, lots of times like with Latin, they'll do a reduced load in Latin the first year, and then the next year they're expected to be on task with everyone else, well, depending on the situation, obviously.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting conundrum, and one we talk about a lot at Emmanuel. When you are accepting students around the middle school years or later in the elementary years, the gaps can really broaden and
Right.
really widen, and then it can be difficult to assess, is this a gap that we can cover and make up, or will this be
And
Insurmountable.
sometimes you certainly can do that.
Yeah.
But for some children that we have accepted in the past, that just wasn't gonna happen. And we've had to say, maybe this isn't gonna work.
Yeah, really hard conversations.
I think faculty input in the admissions process is really important, and doing those assessments like you're talking about against your own curriculum, as opposed to simply accepting transcripts or something of that sort, right? Because that assesses how a child did with a X other teacher in X other curriculum. Yeah, absolutely. And then the family engagement. Are they really motivated? Do they really want to be here? Yeah, one of the case studies I'd like to look at later, it is specifically about Latin in the older grades, and various ways you can try to work on that, because that's a real challenge, I think, for many of us. Yeah, those are great points. Okay, I also included a course guide. So this is 4th grade literature. This is a sample of our baseline foundational curriculum document. So subject by subject, grade by grade, we have course guides, and these map out certainly descriptions of the course, our text commitments, how we will grade and assess the course, and then the learning objectives. And those come alive in various places. But this is something families can see, and they get a stack of these at the start of the year to read over to understand what will be happening for their child. We commit to these, and while they're living documents in the sense that we're constantly using them, we have an overall process before any curriculum guide would be changed of this sort. So it's important that we're making sure that the progression of difficulty and assessment and materials from grade to grade is consistent, subject by subject. So this is our way to do that. I think this is a huge part of serving students. This creates clarity for families about what we're doing and when and why. It also makes sure that we're doing as much as we can to anticipate any gaps and not allow that to happen, by making sure that we're consistent in our curriculum expectations, and so on. And then these course objectives are what we really hope students will be able to do year by year. So number 4, they will be able to read each book with fluency. That can be challenging to assess, and the language there is not terribly specific, because that can vary, and there can be varying levels of fluency that are acceptable in the classroom. Some are far more specific, however. Student will understand the exposition, the rising action, the climax, and so on of each book that they study. So making them living and active is very important. This also makes sure that we're setting our own expectations for student growth and context, and we have a very practical check to go back to and look at to assess, is the student able to meet the objectives broadly? Maybe they're not mastering them to the degree that we would like, but the child is meeting these objectives. He's doing all right, and so on. Sometimes I think, too, an interesting section to look at for me is the homework and assessment expectations. There's often a shift in many subjects between our lower school students and our middle school students in terms of how much participation is assessed and how specifically. So in the lower school, if you are really engaged in the lesson and you're asking to contribute answers and so on, you're really engaged positively. You're really participating in the lesson. In the upper grades, that starts to shift and change to some more specific and observable types of things, such as note-taking. You're reviewing your note-taking is a participation grade. And so we often find that students, as they progress into the middle school years, struggle more in their grades. And I think a lot of it is linked to how we assess participation and what we're expecting in the classroom. So it illuminates certain aspects that happen in a grade, or trends across grades that are really beneficial. All right. After school tutoring program. Okay. This is so great. Having a tutoring program at your school is so wonderful. I cannot emphasize it enough, especially if you have people in your community that can really serve in tutoring and are familiar with the curriculum, understand the curriculum needs. So for example, at Emmanuel, we have several teachers in the past few years that have gotten married and had children, and they're not teaching anymore, but they're available to come and tutor students, and they're all part of the tutoring program. They know the curriculum, they, in many cases, know the specific children, and they're able to really, really help bring students up to speed or help them practice a challenging concept to the point of mastery. This in-house program has just been huge in supporting our students. New students, especially that come to the school, often have gaps. They maybe don't write in cursive, and also there may be apparently half a year or a year behind in math at the same time. And so a tutoring program can help really tackle those in conjunction with the school and the homeroom teacher in a way that's really valuable.
So do they pay the tutor directly?
No, so we actually manage that as a program of the school. This is another benefit of the program. Parents will pay the school for this. This allows us to hold parents accountable to stay on top of payments. It allows us to systematize how much we're charging, the general amounts of time. We're also using school property to do this, and often school resources, books, and so on. So it's a school program, and parents pay through our main program.
And then you pay the teachers the tutors a salary? How do you want to speak to that? Go ahead.
So each tutoring session has a set cost, and that's standardized for us. You know, you look at rates in your area. For us, that's $30 for a 30-minute session. The parent is charged $40. Emmanuel gets $10 for overhead and just general support of the program. The tutor gets $30. That's just like an hourly wage. So if it's a regular faculty member, that's added every payroll based on how much they tutored during the last period. We do something similar with after-school music lessons. So any music lesson taught on campus, we have a similar program. So teachers get paid regularly, accurately. If a session is missed because the parent didn't cancel, they're still charged. So teachers don't have to go after after people, and it just, there's no conflict there.
Mm-hmm.
But if the student's sick or the teacher's sick, of course, right, like that's a reasonable thing. This has been, I mean,
A game changer.
truly amazing for us. Given, you know, the nature of our curriculum, the nature of your curriculum. You don't want a student going off to just any tutor or a tutoring center or places that are gonna work in conflict with the way we teach and learn.
And we can't always necessarily force a family to engage in our tutoring. There are times when we require it in order to advance to the next level. But even when it's just recommended, it's still highly sought after by our parents.
So then are teachers not, if there's not an expectation that they'll follow up with a child after school? If they do, they're part of that tutoring program? How does that work?
That's a great question. Some of that is left up to faculty discernment. It's certainly not a problem for a teacher to say, oh, let me take 15 minutes after school, we're gonna really hash out this parsing issue you have. That's fine, that's wonderful. We don't want to discourage faculty from doing that. But often a need for more regular tutoring is presented or requested by families. And that's when we would say you have to do this through the tutoring program if you want something regular.
I see, okay.
That's helpful.
Yeah. Go ahead. I was just gonna say, we do put some limits on, like, we try to not have like the primary teacher be the tutor if that's feasible. Doesn't always work, especially with Latin and things like that, but all of that's kind of managed to make sure there aren't conflicts.
And teachers aren't necessarily selecting themselves for tutoring appointments either. That's directed by someone, which they can take on or not. I think part of the point of our tutoring program is that if you're working as a tutor, your job is to work yourself out of a job when it comes to tutoring. Our goal is for students to be fully immersed in the curriculum and capably working in the curriculum. There's a difference for us between homework support tutoring and academic tutoring. There are occasions when students will need or families will ask for regular homework support. Maybe, mom and dad have very demanding jobs, they're not supervising homework. That's really what that child needs in order to address some error or confusion they have, and that would be okay. But we prioritize academic tutoring when we have limitations, where we're really focusing on a particular skill or piece of knowledge that the student needs, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then we come to just general sorts of policies. So this is something I'm interested to learn a lot more about, probation and graduation standards and more. How are we deciding that we will pass students on to the next level? You're probably looking at the next thing, which says talented and gifted students. I don't have any specific policy sample for you, sorry. No, that's fine. So that's something I would love to learn more about. I'm curious what other schools do. At what point do you say this child is ready to pass on to 7th grade or not? What if a child fails Latin? Should they advance to the next grade or not? If you require summer work in order for them to be able to advance to the next level, how do you ensure that that's done well enough that the student is really equipped for the next level of Latin? These are such challenges. What if you have a student, a graduating level student, and they fail one class? Do they graduate? Do you withhold graduation? What do you do? I think those are really interesting and challenging questions to think through. And of course, all of those standards are tied to our learning objectives and are in our course guides. Also, another question on my mind, what sort of consequences do you employ? What's the role of the school or the teacher to help when a student is struggling or not meeting the objectives? Like you were asking, is it the teacher's responsibility to spend time with their students after school to make sure that they can meet every objective? Is that outside the scope of what they should be doing every day on a normal basis? I think another really helpful thing to think about if you don't do this, it's been really, really invaluable at Emmanuel, is developing some sort of inner log for teachers and administrators to privately sort of keep record of parent meetings, conversations, phone calls, specific conversations about a child's growth and abilities. This can be really invaluable when you're tracking a student's growth from year to year and deciding how you can really support that family best. And then what you're looking at right here would be something we've used pretty regularly when talking about conversations with parents, when parents come in and they share that their child is gifted and talented, and you're looking at caring for a student in that way. What's important to ask them, what's important to understand, and how do you talk to parents about not offering advanced work if that's what your school decides to do, which I think can be very challenging. So we just have highlighted some of our school philosophy on this. The primary sort of point here is that quickly advancing a student or providing extra work or advanced pacing may mean a student has practiced to the point of being able to do something, but doesn't necessarily mean they've mastered it or that they're unable to not do it. So that's something we would emphasize a lot with our families, as well as their role, what we view as their role, which is that they are the primary educator. Okay, I have a number of case studies. We'll focus the rest of our time here. Okay, if we could break up into small groups. There are a few for you to choose from. There's one on caring for outliers. So if you are a homeroom teacher or classroom teacher, this may be really interesting to explore in particular. There's one on Latin tracking. So when you have difficulties with new students coming in and entering the Latin program, here's one way you could tackle that. One on multiple grade classrooms, and then one on potentially an emerging learning difference in a first grade student. All right, I'll let you, maybe what we could do is say, if you're interested in case study number 1, you can come up here. Case study number 2 up here, and then 3 or 4. And you can go wherever you want to discuss any one of them. Okay. Maybe what we can do here in our closing is walk through some of the case studies and your conversations together. So could we start with case study 1, which is where you care for the outliers within the classroom? Ms. Habrick, could I?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. That'd be great.
Well, it's very hard, of course, when you're dealing with that, to make sure you're not missing that middle group, you know, all these outliers. We were talking about how when you know, because two students had C's, and you know, when is it time to step in with extra tutoring with these kids or slow things down. We both were not really keen on the extra work or extra credit. I liked how y'all had a standardized policy, because we don't have a standardized policy. Some teachers give extra credit, some don't. So maybe we'll work on that.
Okay.
I know
That's
kids
a
are challenging.
challenge.
Yeah. So that might be something we need to look at. Let's see, what were some of the other problems? The domino effect, right? How's it going to affect those kids and the curriculum going
Right, so these students are struggling with reading
in 4th grade?
in 4th grade, so
Right.
they're really headed towards an age in which, you know, their need for reading comprehension is going to have to be really strong. And we're not serving them to move into, for, you know, our sake, the upper school, if they are not able to manage that. So, you know, in addition to if things slow down so much to manage their needs in the classroom, and we're not getting through the curriculum as planned, right, for the sake of the whole.
Yeah, the balancing
How many of you at your schools have extra credit? Is that a common?
We have it sometimes.
Here and
It's
there.
almost
It's a very
situation.
practical thing, right? To say, okay, here's some extra credit, this will help your grade. Yeah.
Although I think with, at OSL, we have a summer school program that if you're not passing, which is essentially kind of extra credit, but and even the term extra credit kind of rubs me the wrong way because, by the way, because I'm not big on, I don't think that our arbitrary grading system is helpful in terms of really identifying needs for our students.
Yeah.
And it doesn't truly give red flags to parents soon enough.
Right.
So that extra credit should be a non-issue really. It's a non-starter. We shouldn't be worried about the grade. We need to make sure that our students are mastering. Just like you've got written down in here that we're the yeah. And thank you. We just, there's no reason for that. You need to be addressing each one of the needs of the mastery
Right.
before they can move forward.
Often parents are very motivated by grades.
Yes, they are.
And that's, I think, part of the challenge there is that the grade and our really progressive system of letter grades and all of these things, that communicates something to parents. It tells them how their child is doing, and so they're looking at the grade and they're really missing what's meaningful. And it's hard, I think, for us not to do that too, when this is the system that we have, and we're teaching with a traditional grading system or scale. Absolutely.
Ms. Kramer would like to throw out the whole traditional grading scale.
That's
another
I would
whole
love
conference.
trying to do that.
I would
Should talk to
love
Pastor
that.
Paul about that.
I should, I would love to.
He
I would
wants
love
to.
to
He
do
wants to
that.
do like a number system
Oh,
instead of like
interesting.
grades. I don't know.
Are you talking about Pastor
it.
Paul?
Yeah.
I know
talk
we're
about
working
that.
on that.
Yeah.
We're chatting.
Yeah, I would love to
It's very
hear more about
complicated.
that.
I don't understand it yet, but.
The issue is to meaningfully assess and give meaningful feedback. It's just going to be incredibly time consuming to really talk about with families how a student is doing level by level.
Well, it goes against everything else their form of education has been drawn up to this point.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
And in every other realm of the world except for ours. And so to be completely different from what they're used to, is gonna be the battle.
And also when they leave your school, how's that transition look to going to that next level, right? That can translate to wherever school they're going to, whether it's a different high school or college or, we stop at 8th grade, so we have to have something to give to high schools, right?
A transcript.
Well, and many have maybe one sibling in your school and one in another school or different things, and how they balance that and figure that out. It's confusing for them.
Oh, absolutely. How about the Latin tracking? Maybe?
Well, it sounds like everyone does Latin tracking, basically. So we were talking about how that can be really beneficial. What's nice is, what's the name of your school again? I'm sorry.
Trinity.
Trinity. It sounds like at Trinity, they have Latin all at the same time, and they have 4 teachers that can teach Latin. So they just have 4 levels of Latin.
That's what we do too.
Yeah, so even if like a 7th grader tests into the 3rd grade level, they go and they take the 3rd grade, 4th grade level Latin with the 3rd and 4th graders. And so they luckily have the flexibility to do that, where they can just have Latin at one time during the day, which is really nice.
We do that too, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
And then at our Savior, y'all do kind of the same thing, or?
We don't move them between grades, the curriculum's just adjusted based on where they're at.
Sure.
And they try to keep it, we do that more with math.
We find, and although we do that, it's also, the first few, we've only had a school for 7 years and we've only done Latin for 5, and so, or 6, but what we find is that worked really well our first several years. We could progress everybody where we needed to. But then when you get a kid, like you said earlier, that comes in at the 6th grade, that's never had any Latin, so then putting him down, and then that's where it just, the logistics of keeping all that straight sometimes is a little bit tricky. And so, although it does work well for us, there are just some pieces of it that are hard to manage too.
Yeah, what a blessing to have multiple faculty that are really well equipped to teach Latin.
We once had a guru in Latin, but then somebody stole her. No issues here with that. Yeah, and it helps because when she would always progress with the kids, she started with us at the beginning and she progressed as the kids progressed. That's how she was learning it at the same time. And what a huge benefit that was for us. And so to replace her then with somebody that's at that same level is difficult because Latin is not easy.
Right, absolutely. It's not a broad specialty. Have you found in your schools any corollary blessings to your students as a result of Latin tracking?
I think we have, and if I understand your question correctly, we have noticed that is quite a motivator for a 6th grader that's coming into the 3rd grade that doesn't want to go to a 3rd grade classroom. Peer pressure works for us in some regards. They're going to work a little bit harder because they're going to want to move up a little bit quicker, and so they just kind of then once we have established those groups, then year to year, they move kind of on together. And so they kind of stick together unless somebody's a standout. But with Latin in particular, and our kids with special needs, it has been interesting because the first thing we did was take everybody that had special needs out of Latin, because it was too hard for them. That's what we thought, And now as we study, simply classical and, some of those books, we're saying, hey, wait a second, this is what they all need. And so it's really been eye-opening for us to see what a key Latin can be. And it is hard. It is hard for parents to understand why we have it. It's hard for kids to understand why we have it. But it really is such a blessing to them to be able to work how their brains work when they're little.
Absolutely. And it all moves, our students closer to the goal of being able to read the original Latin text as they were intended. And then ladies, did you do case study 4 or 3? The multi-grade classroom 3? Okay. How did that go? What did you discuss?
Did I mention I had an issue with her already and then just be in the same group as her? No. We felt like, multi-grade really is such a blessing anyway. And for those that maybe are working down a grade level, it gives them a little bit of some comfort in their own room. But then also it's a motivator for those at the lower end to work towards the upper end. So there can be such a blessing, but we really felt like the parents needed to know right away, not just kind of monitor it, but just make them aware of the situation so it's not a huge surprise.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, good.
That's great. Yeah, especially when those students that have been at the low end are then advancing to the next grade or homeroom where they will be one of the youngest in that particular environment. So that's great. Wonderful. Okay. Well. And then number 4, core reading skills. I think that's a really interesting one to discuss. I'm sure we all find experiences with students coming into our school that we accept, and then it starts to emerge over time, or we start to become aware over time, that they are struggling in significant ways that our faculty may not be equipped to deal with. So that's always helpful to think about and talk about. And discuss, at what point we seek outside support. If you have outside support to offer in your community, what a blessing, like a program to help with students that are working through dyslexia or something like that. Overall, I think the most important thing we can emphasize to our families and with them is that they are responsible for their children's education. It's not a way to pass off responsibility, but it really meaningfully limits our scope, and it frees us as schools and as teachers to really love and care for our students well. Any other questions or thoughts in closing? All right, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.